welcome to Mini Stories, where we will be listening to the story, Friendships That Stand the Test of Time. Chapter 1, The First Encounter. I had always been the type of person to keep to myself. At school, I wasn't invisible, but I wasn't the life of the party either. I had a group of acquaintances, sure, but no one I would call a true friend. That was until I met Ava. It was the first day of high school, and I was trying to make my way through the crowded hallways. I had my eyes glued to the floor, navigating the sea of unfamiliar faces, when I accidentally bumped into someone. "Sorry," I muttered, looking up to see a girl with wild, curly hair and a bright smile. She didn't seem at all fazed by the collision. "No worries," she said, laughing lightly. "Hey, you're new, right?" I nodded, still a little embarrassed. "Yeah, just transferred here." She raised an eyebrow. I could tell. Not a lot of new faces around here. "I'm Ava." "Ava," I repeated, trying to remember her name. "I'm Lily." "I know. I've seen you around," she said with a grin. "Don't worry. We'll be fast friends." I chuckled, feeling a little skeptical but also relieved. I had been dreading the first day of school, unsure of where I would fit in. But Ava, with her easy confidence, made everything feel a little more bearable. That moment was the start of something I didn't realize I needed: friendship. Chapter 2, A Growing Bond. The days that followed that first encounter with Ava were a whirlwind of laughter, new experiences, and a sense of belonging I had never known before. It wasn't just the constant companionship that made everything seem brighter, it was Ava herself. Her energy was infectious, her optimism so pure, and her belief in me so unwavering that it made me feel like I could take on the world. I had spent most of my life feeling like an outsider. I wasn't unpopular, but I wasn't particularly close to anyone either. I had friends, sure, but I always felt like something was missing. It wasn't until I met Ava that I realized what that missing piece was: someone who truly understood me, someone who accepted me for all my quirks and insecurities. We spent every lunch together from that day on, sitting in the far corner of the cafeteria where the sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm golden hue over the room. There, we shared everything: stories of our childhood, our hopes, our fears, and our dreams. With every conversation, I felt the walls I had carefully built around myself start to crumble. She would always make me laugh, even when I didn't feel like it. Once, we were sitting in the library, both of us buried in our textbooks, trying to get ahead on our homework. Ava, as usual, was distracted, fiddling with a pen between her fingers. She always seemed to have 100 things on her mind at once, but that was one of the things I loved about her, her boundless energy. "Lily," she said suddenly, her voice filled with mischief, "if I were a superhero, I'd be Captain Procrastination." I looked up from my notes, raising an eyebrow. "How do you figure?" "I mean, look at us," she gestured to the piles of textbooks and notes in front of us. "Instead of actually studying, we're just sitting here making small talk about random things. We're practically a case study in delayed productivity." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're unbelievable," I said, shaking my head. "Only you could turn studying into a comedy show." She shrugged nonchalantly. "What can I say? I'm gifted." In that moment, I realized something important. With Ava, I didn't have to be perfect. I could be myself, flaws and all, and it was more than enough. She wasn't just a friend, she was the person who saw me when I couldn't see myself. And that made all the difference. As the weeks went by, we became inseparable. I started looking forward to every day at school, knowing that I'd get to see Ava. We would pass notes in class, laughing at our inside jokes, or make plans to hang out after school. It felt like the world was a little bit brighter when she was around. But it wasn't all lightheartedness and laughter. Ava began to open up to me about things I hadn't expected. She wasn't the bubbly, carefree girl everyone thought she was. Beneath her exuberant exterior, there was a layer of vulnerability she kept hidden from everyone except me. One afternoon, after school, we went for a walk around the park, the chilly autumn air brushing against our faces. The trees had just begun to change color, their leaves turning shades of orange, yellow, and red. It was beautiful, but there was a subtle sadness in the way Ava walked beside me, her usual playful energy absent. "Hey," I said, breaking the silence. "What's wrong? You've been a little quiet lately." She sighed, running a hand through her wild curls. "I don't know. Just, everything's been a lot lately." I nudged her gently with my elbow, trying to make her smile. "Ava, you're the queen of handling everything. What's going on?" She stopped walking, looking out at the lake in front of us. "It's just that, sometimes, I don't know if I'm doing enough. You know? I try so hard to make everyone happy, but I feel like I'm failing. At school. At home. With friends." I was taken aback. This was a side of Ava I hadn't seen before, this fear, this doubt. It was hard to reconcile with the confident, unstoppable girl I knew. But that was the thing about Ava, she was strong, but she wasn't invincible. She had her moments of weakness, just like anyone else. I stepped in front of her, stopping her from walking any further. "Ava, you're amazing. You're more than enough. Don't let anyone or anything make you feel like you're not. You don't have to be perfect all the time." She looked at me, her eyes softening, and then, for the first time in days, she gave me a small smile. "Thanks, Lily. I needed to hear that." I put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm always here for you, okay? No matter what." She nodded, and we continued walking, the weight of her worries seeming just a little bit lighter. The next few weeks were filled with tests, projects, and exams, but Ava and I continued to lean on each other. We had our late-night study sessions, where we would cram for exams and share our favorite snacks, laughing at the most absurd things. We were in it together, every step of the way. It wasn't just the big moments that stood out to me, though, it was the small things that made our bond even stronger. Like when Ava would send me a text in the middle of the day, just to check in. Or when we'd sit in the cafeteria, chatting about life, and she'd randomly say something that would make me burst out laughing. Those moments, the quiet ones, were the ones I cherished the most. One day, I found myself reflecting on how far our friendship had come. I had started high school with no real expectations of making lasting connections, and now, here I was, with a friend who had become a constant in my life. Ava wasn't just my best friend anymore, she was family. I smiled to myself, grateful for the friendship we had built. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when I doubted it all, but we had made it work. And as we sat together that day, surrounded by laughter and the noise of the cafeteria, I knew one thing for sure: Ava would always be there for me. And I would always be there for her. Our bond, built on trust, understanding, and shared moments of joy and sadness, was unbreakable. And no matter what the future held, I knew that this was just the beginning of a friendship that would last for a lifetime. Chapter 3: The Test. As winter settled in, the days grew shorter, and the air grew colder. The excitement of the beginning of the school year had begun to fade, replaced by the grind of midterms, projects, and college applications. For most, it was the time of the year when stress seemed to multiply with every passing day. Yet, for Ava and me, it felt like the weight of the world was suddenly on our shoulders. Ava had always been the star student, the one who effortlessly juggled school, extracurriculars, and a social life. But now, even she was beginning to show signs of the strain. I could see it in the way she pulled away, becoming quieter, more reserved. She had always been the one who held everything together, the one who made it all look easy, but now she was starting to crack under the pressure. And no matter how many times I asked her what was going on, she always brushed me off with a smile, pretending everything was fine. It was late one evening when I finally confronted her about it. We had just finished our study session at the library, and as we were walking out, the cold air hit us, making us shiver. "Ava," I said, my voice serious, "I know you're not okay. You've been acting distant lately. Please, talk to me." She didn't meet my eyes at first, focusing instead on the ground beneath her feet. Her usual confidence seemed to have vanished, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I'd get anything more than a few vague words in return. But then, she took a deep breath and finally looked up at me. "I'm just tired, Lily," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Tired of trying to keep everything together. I'm worried about the future. About college. About what happens after high school. Her words struck me like a slap in the face. Ava had always been so sure of herself, so confident in her ability to handle whatever came her way. To hear her express doubt and fear like this was a shock, and it hit me harder than I expected. You don't have to do it all alone, Ava, I said, reaching out and grabbing her hand. You don't have to carry everything on your own. I'm here for you, okay? We're in this together. Ava's lips trembled, and I could see the fight in her eyes, the desire to stay strong, to push through everything on her own. But after a few moments of silence, she let out a long sigh and gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. I know, she said softly, her voice catching in her throat. I don't know what to do anymore. It's like everything's moving so fast, and I'm scared I'm going to get left behind. For the first time, I saw Ava for who she truly was, a scared, vulnerable girl who didn't have all the answers, someone who was just trying to figure it all out. And in that moment, something shifted between us. We weren't just friends anymore, we were two people facing the world's challenges together, no longer pretending to have it all figured out. I'm not going anywhere, Ava, I said firmly, my grip tightening around her hand. You don't have to go through this by yourself. We're going to figure it out, okay? Whatever happens, we'll face it together. She smiled through her tears, and I could see the relief in her eyes. Thank you, Lily. I needed to hear that. That night, we sat together on the bench outside the library, talking about everything and nothing. We spoke about our future, our hopes for college, and the fears we both had about growing up. We laughed, we cried, and in that moment, I realized just how much I had come to depend on her. Ava was my best friend, my sister in all but blood, and I would do anything to help her through whatever came next. But the next morning, things started to shift in ways I hadn't expected. It wasn't just that Ava was stressed about her future, there was something more to it. The quiet moments between us, the laughter, the inside jokes, began to feel less genuine. Not because we didn't care for each other anymore, but because the weight of our lives was pulling us in different directions. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes in Ava's behavior. She started spending more time with her boyfriend, Jack, and less time with me. It wasn't that she was abandoning me, but there was a distance forming between us. And every time I tried to bring it up, she would brush me off with a forced smile and a quick excuse. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, a result of all the stress she was under. But as the days went by, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was changing, and not necessarily in a good way. It wasn't long before I found myself spending more time alone, my conversations with Ava becoming fewer and farther between. I tried to reach out, but the calls went unanswered, the texts ignored. It was like she was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the cafeteria, staring at my phone as I waited for Ava's usual, "Hey, I'm running late. Meet you there," I text, but it never came. Instead, my phone buzzed with a message from someone else. It was Jack. "Hey, Lily. I think you should know. Ava and I are thinking about taking things to the next level. She's ready to move in with me." I felt a tightness in my chest, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. Ava had never mentioned this to me. She had never even hinted at it. The thought of her moving in with Jack, of them becoming something so serious, left me with a strange mix of emotions, happiness for her, yes, but also a deep sense of loss. She was moving forward, making decisions without me, and I felt left behind. I tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach, but it was hard. Ava was still my best friend, my confidant. But now, she was becoming someone else's. And in the process, I realized that maybe our lives were taking us in different directions. It wasn't anyone's fault, it was just life. People grew, changed, and moved on. The next day, I saw her walking down the hallway, Jack by her side, their hands intertwined. They looked happy, and in that moment, I realized that Ava was no longer the carefree girl I had met years ago. She was becoming an adult, and our paths, as much as I wished otherwise, were starting to diverge. I had always known this day would come, The day when we would have to let go of the past, of the high school versions of ourselves who could spend hours talking without a care in the world. But even knowing it was inevitable didn't make it any easier. The truth was, I didn't know how to let go. How do you say goodbye to someone who had been a part of you for so long? And yet, as I watched Ava walk down the hallway with Jack, I knew this was just another step in her journey, a new chapter she was beginning to write. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to start writing my own. Chapter 4, The Road Ahead. As the months passed, Ava and I continued to grow closer. We went through the highs and lows of high school together, tests, friendships, heartbreaks, and everything in between. We were there for each other in ways I never thought possible. It wasn't always easy, but we learned the value of sticking together, even when times were tough. One evening, as we sat together in her living room, surrounded by homework and empty snack bags, Ava turned to me with a grin. "You know, I think we make a pretty good team," she said, nudging me with her elbow. I smiled back, feeling the warmth of her friendship fill the room. "I'd say we're unstoppable." She laughed. "Seriously. We've been through everything together, nothing can tear us apart." In that moment, I realized that Ava wasn't just my best friend. She was the person who had been with me through thick and thin, the one who knew me better than anyone else. And I was grateful for her every single day. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns, but as long as we had each other, I knew we could handle anything. After all, that's what true friendship was all about, not just the fun times, but the ability to face the tough times, side by side, and come out stronger on the other side. Chapter 5, Unspoken Promises. The years had passed faster than I had expected. High school felt like it had been a lifetime ago, yet at the same time, it felt like it had just happened yesterday. The familiar halls, the lunchtime laughter, the late-night study sessions, everything about those days seemed so vivid, so real. But life had a way of moving forward, relentlessly so, no matter how much we tried to hold on to the past. And Ava and I, though separated by miles and time, had never let go of each other. I had stayed behind in our hometown, pursuing a degree at the local university while Ava had moved to a different city for her college education. Despite the distance, we had stayed close. The phone calls were endless, our late-night chats on video calls frequent, and we made it a point to visit each other during holidays or long weekends. It wasn't the same as seeing her every day, of course, but it was enough to keep our connection alive. Our friendship had only deepened over time, even though our lives were diverging in ways I hadn't anticipated. There were times when I missed her so much that it physically hurt. Like when I'd have a moment of triumph or an accomplishment, and I'd immediately want to call her and share it. Or those times when I felt down and could have really used her lighthearted humor or her calming presence. But life was different now. We were adults, navigating our own paths, and even though we weren't side by side as often as we had been in the past, I never doubted that she was just a phone call away. One chilly autumn evening, as I sat in my small apartment, scrolling through old pictures of us from high school, nostalgia hit me like a wave. There we were, younger and carefree, posing at school events, laughing together after exams, sneaking around campus during our lunch breaks. Our friendship had always been so easy, so natural. I missed the simplicity of those days when we could talk about anything without worrying about what the future might bring. But I also knew that things had changed for both of us. I was about to graduate, and Ava had recently gotten her first job in the city. It wasn't like we were growing apart, but our individual journeys were pulling us in different directions. That realization hit me one afternoon while I was lying on my couch, lost in thought. My phone buzzed, breaking my reverie. It was a message from Ava. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. Are you free this weekend? I have some big news to share." I grinned to myself. Even now, she had a way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the world. I quickly replied, "Always for you, you know that." "Tell me, what's going on?" The response came almost immediately. "I think I'm ready to make a big move. Come visit me this weekend, and I'll tell you everything." My heart skipped a beat. The excitement in her words was contagious, and I couldn't wait to hear what she had to say. Ava had always been the brave one, the one who made decisions with confidence and courage, even when the future was uncertain. I, on the other hand, had always been more cautious, hesitant to take big risks. But I had always admired her for that. That weekend, I packed my bags and made the trip to see her. The train ride felt longer than usual as my mind raced with possibilities about what she was planning. Was she moving to a new city? Was she starting something new? The anticipation kept me on edge the entire journey. When I finally arrived, I was greeted by the familiar sound of her laugh echoing from her apartment door. Ava had this ability to make everything feel like home, no matter where she was. She opened the door with a smile, her bright eyes lighting up when she saw me. "You're finally here," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I've been waiting all day to share this with you." I smiled, my heart warming at the sight of her. "You've got me all curious now. What's this big news?" Ava led me to the couch, sitting me down before taking a deep breath. She looked at me with a seriousness I wasn't used to seeing in her. "I'm moving in with Jack," she said, her voice steady but filled with excitement. "I've decided it's time. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I think it's the right step for me." My mind went blank for a moment as I processed what she had just said. Jack. He was her boyfriend, her first real boyfriend. They had been dating for over a year, and while I had known they were getting serious, I hadn't expected this. Moving in together was a huge step, and Ava had always been the independent one, the one who wanted to maintain her freedom. I looked at her carefully, unsure of how to respond. "Are you sure, Ava? This is a big decision. I mean, it's Jack, and I know you two are great together, but have you thought it all through?" She nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I have. I've thought about it a lot. It just feels right. I'm not scared of it anymore." I could see the conviction in her eyes. This wasn't just a whim or a spur-of-the-moment decision. She had put a lot of thought into it, and she was ready. For a moment, I felt a pang of jealousy, not because I didn't want her to be happy, but because it felt like she was growing up faster than I was. She was taking the plunge, while I was still clinging to the safety of my comfort zone. But then, as I watched her smile, I realized that this was just the next chapter in her life. And I had always been there to support her, no matter what. So, instead of letting my insecurities get in the way, I smiled back and hugged her tightly. "I'm so happy for you, Ava," I said sincerely. "You deserve this. You've worked so hard, and I know this is going to be amazing for you." Her eyes softened, and she squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you understand. It feels like a big leap, but I know I'm ready. And I want you to be there with me, every step of the way." And in that moment, I realized something important. It wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about clinging to the past or feeling like things were changing too fast. It was about Ava, and it was about me being there for her, just like she had always been there for me. The truth was, we were both growing up. Our paths might be diverging, but our friendship, the bond we had, would never fade. It had been tested, yes, but it had only become stronger. And as I sat there with Ava, talking about her future and what lay ahead, I knew one thing for sure: no matter where life took us, we'd always find our way back to each other. Because that's what friendship was. Unspoken promises. A connection that couldn't be broken by time or distance. And I knew that no matter what happened, we'd always be there for each other. The end. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, like, comment, share and subscribe.